Breaking news tonight, the first post-Mueller report subpoena of a major Mueller witness. This is Mueller's star witness, former White House counsel Don McGahn, Jerry Nadler, calling him to testify before the House. McGahn's interviews with the special counsel cited 157 times in the Mueller report as McGahn detailed some of the most damning episodes of Trump's efforts to crack down on the probe. He is now being compared with Richard Nixon's famous White House counsel, who ultimately broke from Nixon during Watergate. And Mueller recounts that McGahn was afraid that Trump's demands to fire Mueller would basically be a Saturday Night Massacre like Nixon. When the Watergate special prosecutor was ousted, that was the beginning of the end of Nixon's presidency. To discuss this White House counsel's unique role in the Mueller probe and beyond, I turn to a former White House counsel. Kathy Ruemmler was White House counsel to President Obama from 2011 to 2014. She also, in all of this, represented a Mueller witness, George Nader. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ari. It's great to be here.
When you read the account of Don McGahn's time in the Trump White House, was that similar, normal, like your time?
Absolutely not. No.
Do you ever recall telling the president that a request or an order was unlawful?
No. No.
So walk us through just how not only strange and in a way it's amazing copy as a story.
Yeah, it's incredible.
But all of your reactions to it having held the same post.
Yeah, I've run out of adjectives to describe what it must be like and what it must have been like for Don McGahn working in this White House, because President Obama, and I also had the privilege of working for President Clinton before that, they understood the power and the authority and the responsibility that came with the office of the presidency. And President Trump seems not to understand that at all. And I think that is really laid bare in the report, particularly in the parts that talk about the obstruction and his instructions to the White House counsel to do a variety of different things, his directives to AG Sessions to quote-unquote unrecuse. One of the things that I found fascinating in the report was the conversation that he had with the director of the NSA, Admiral Rogers, and the deputy director. And the deputy director says in the report, in my 40 years of government service, I've never had a conversation like that with anyone, much less the President of the United States. And they wrote a memo to the file that they then locked in the safe. There are lots of things in this report that have not even been sort of touched upon, but that in, I think, sort of the history of our government would just be deemed in and of themselves just extraordinary.
During the campaign, they talked about the Trump train. And one of the things that comes through in Mueller's evidence, and he deems McGahn not only credible, but it's his most cited witness, was that if he didn't announced that he was going to jump off the train, he thought he would be guilty of a crime, that he would end up in jail.
Yeah.
Which is not where most people want to go after the White House.
Right.
I'm going to ask you a question that you may or may not answer, I realize, but I'm going to ask you. Did you ever get an order from President Obama and then have to consult your personal lawyer for your own criminal liability?
Never.
What does it tell you when we read those stories? This is the star witness, and he's the star witness partly because he would get off the phone with the president, and according to Mueller, the next call would be to McGahn's personal lawyer.
It's so difficult to express to people who don't have the experience in working at the White House or don't understand, what it's like to work in government, how just so outside of the realm of not even normal, but just barely acceptable. I mean, it's just stranger than fiction is the only way I can describe it. It's just astonishing.
One of the stories that hasn't got as much attention in here is that after a lot of the stuff went down, what McGahn called the crazy expletive stuff, he was still on the job. And then Trump asked him to lie and falsify records to cover up that Trump had tried to oust Mueller. And they have a tense face-to-face where McGahn does stand up to him and stare him down. And then Trump says at one point something to the effect of, meaning he makes the threat known that, well, if you don't go along with this, you might lose this job.
Yeah.
And McGahn says to someone else in the White House, according to Mueller, it was like the president still didn't understand that wasn't leverage over me. If I then left after both the massacre and then refusing to falsify records, it would be bad for Trump.
Right. That's the interesting dynamic, right? Is President Trump doesn't seem to get it. And there are a couple things going on here. One is that he's asking Don McGahn to do these things that Don McGahn says I'm not going to do. But there's no reason why the president himself couldn't do what he's asking McGahn to do. But the president doesn't want to do that because he wants to presumably, and I think Don McGahn knows this full well, he wanted to presumably to blame Don McGahn, to disavow the order to Don McGahn later if, it came out. So when he's asking McGahn to call, Rod Rosenstein and tell Rod to fire the special counsel, there's no reason why the president himself couldn't have picked up the phone and called Rod. And as we've seen, lots of reporting, he has no hesitation to pick up the phone and call all sorts of people. But he didn't. He was savvy enough to.
He was canny.
He was canny enough.
Yeah.
And to me, the notion that it's just riddled throughout the report is the canniness and the corrupt motivation that is really just, I think, littered throughout the report.
Right, and Mueller, and I was just speaking about this earlier in a report we did on the show, Mueller uses that to great effect as evidence against Trump, the constant awareness that what he was doing was wrong or corrupt and then hiding it. McGahn, though, ultimately was deemed cooperative, credible, has not been accused by Mueller of wrongdoing. The one White House counsel who's been caught up in this that has been accused, hasn't been, of course, to trial yet, is someone that was in the Obama White House as well, former White House counsel Greg Craig, charges that he, quote, lied and concealed information from the Justice Department about his work for Ukraine. Based on what you know and having been in the same White House, in the same post at different times, your view of those charges and what it means that Mueller's referred that case and it's being pursued? Well,
I don't know more than what I read in the indictment. I do know Craig personally, and I think, he's a very fine lawyer and has had a really well-deserved and well-earned reputation in Washington, and is a very nice person. I don't know the facts beyond what's laid out in the indictment. Obviously, that's going to have to be tried before a jury. I think it's unfortunate and a sad thing, but it will be contested before a jury, and a jury will decide.
And what does it say about Mueller that he has been so aggressive on that area of the law, which as you know, and I think a lot of viewers have come to learn, was not traditionally enforced this aggressively, and yet Mueller looked at this foreign lobbying stuff and said, well, you can go after the Washington sort of corporate establishment with it if they're not registering.
Right. Well, although Mueller chose not to charge that particular case, right, and referred it out, and a different office charged it. I think that as a former prosecutor, what I would say is that it's always important for prosecutors to think about, just what's fundamentally fair. Something may be a technical violation of a law, but if people didn't have an appreciation because something hadn't been enforced in a way that it's being enforced now, that's a factor that should go into any prosecutor's decision as to whether or not it's a kind of a righteous case to bring. Again, I'm not suggesting this isn't. I don't know enough about the facts, but I think that's important context, and I certainly expect that Greg Craig's defense team will bring that out in front of the jury.
As a former White House counsel, you bring so much expertise and firsthand knowledge. So I'm so glad we got you on the Mueller Report today. I hope you'll come back on the beat.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ari.
Catherine Rumler. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.